Hey everyone, and welcome back to another week of Just Gay Stuff podcast. I am Jess.
And I'm Lauren.
And as you all know, we love to bring you a multitude of things on this podcast. Educational episodes, interviews with amazing local talent. We've had national talent. We've had some international names. And of course, we love to let you know when things are going on in and around the place. We've found that there are a lot of people online still seeking regular events to go to and stuff like that. So, to start off this episode, I just want to say if you are local to Brisbane, you may have seen that from October 23rd until November 10th, the Melt Festival will be premiering here in Brisbane.
And that's so exciting. Melt Festival is a queer culture festival brought to us by Brisbane Powerhouse, and it includes over 120 events by over 222 performers in over 70 venues, and will include a boat ride parade with our very own Courtney Act.
Yeah, down the Brisbane River. So it's heaps to look forward to. And you might be wondering, why are we telling you this today? Well, the reason we're telling you this today is because not only is it going to be here soon, but because on the podcast today for this week's episode is one of the many talented writers and producers whose work will be showcased here for Melt. So today we have the absolute privilege of welcoming Lydia Kuelsen to talk about their production called Burn It.
Hello, Lydia.
Hi, Lydia.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you for joining us. It's always such a pleasure to have guests on the pod.
I know, it's been so good.
We just said in the intro, we're so glad that you reached out to talk to us about Burn It today. So you've written and produced this amazing piece of art that has been showcased at Adelaide Fringe. You'll have just finished up your run of shows at Melbourne Fringe and will now be featured at Melt here in Brisbane. And that's your contemporary drama called Burn It. So in your own words, can you tell us the story behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Burn It is a really naturalistic play, and it focuses on two characters who have just gone on a camping trip because one of them has separated from an abusive partner. So it's got a lot of dark moments. Obviously, that content can be quite heavy, but it's got a lot of humour as well because these two characters have a really interesting friendship where they are just constantly bantering, they're making fun of each other, and they use a lot of jokes and, drinking games and coping mechanisms to actually sort of coerce each other into talking about how they're actually feeling. And they've also got a dynamic that I think a lot of us as queer people can recognise. Anyone who's had, like a best friend in high school where they're quite sexually attracted to each other. They're pretty romantically involved, but they're not actually calling it, dating, but adds quite a level of complexity as well.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
That's incredible. So what inspired you to write a story like this? Were you pulling from your own experiences or natural life?
Yeah, it's definitely very heavily based in my own life, my own experiences. None of it is completely biographical. Everything that happens in the show is tweaked. So sometimes I've written about a situation or something that happens to the characters, and it's based in the feelings that I've had from something that happened to me, but it's never the exact situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually came about because my friend broke up with a partner and I was like, we're going on a camping trip. Let's just get out of here. Let's go do something. And when I did that, I was like, this is silly. This is basically the plot line for a show.
Yeah.
Before we left for the camping trip, I was like, I'm going to write that show. And so I wrote basically the entire thing just before we went. And then some of the things that happened on the trip, some little banter moments that we had, I actually wrote down and they ended up in the script.
Wow.
But yeah, so it's really just a big amalgamation of things that I've experienced, and particularly at the time of writing it, things that I was going through then as well.
Yeah, well, I think we've all been there in those situations where you go, oh, my life could be a show right now.
Yeah.
But then you did the thing where you actually wrote that show instead of just keeping it in your heads like most people.
I just found it so fascinating that you said beforehand, or even the inspiration of it. I would have just been like, oh, wow, just written in this show now.
What's interesting to me as well is that you said that you weren't necessarily going through that exact scenario in your life, but you pulled from the feelings. So as we know, talking to a lot of creators, it's a pretty big process having an idea to producing that idea into a show, pulling from your own feelings for it to then be consumed by an audience. So can you give us the story of how you achieved from just writing it down to now having it performed as a show in festivals?
Yeah.
It's pretty wild. The first iteration we did was I worked with two of my really close friends. So Jackie Martin, who was the director, and Kyle Scott, who was actually the year above me at uni. And Kyle played the other character, Jaden. And from working in that really close friendship group, it made it really easy to be sort of tackling the heavy topics. And some of these characters' feelings were things that I was still going through and they weren't quite resolved. And actually, of the two characters in the show, the other character, Jaden, who has been played by Kyle and is now being played by Sian Dowler, that character is actually more similar to me. So I didn't play that character. And so I've had to really just kind of offer that up to that actor, whoever was taking it on at the time, and allow them to bring their own experiences to those words and those feelings. And I think that has been a really lovely thing to see, from taking it to something that I've just written to performing on the stage, is having someone else's human experience make it their own and translate it into a performance.
Does it feel so surreal to you as a creative who has written this incredible play, I guess, to express and process your thoughts and feelings and then to see it be performed in front of you?
Yeah, it definitely is. And there's definitely one part of the play, there's one monologue that Jaden, the other character, has that at the start was actually really hard for me to hear. Obviously, it's been quite a while since I wrote that, and I've got a bit of a different connection to it now, because it does feel like hearing past feelings rather than having like my current state of mind thrown back at me. But yeah, I think it was just a really freeing thing of being like, I can let this go and let someone else take this. But then also really lovely to sort of have those conversations with the actors that have taken on those roles and hear how they sort of connect to it and how they've experienced something similar. And that's been a really big thing with audiences as well, is that we get that feedback a lot, that they can relate, and a lot of people have experienced similar things. So I think that's been pretty huge as a creative and a writer as well, to just, have everyone being like, yeah, I got that. I've had that feeling.
Do you find that it's kind of therapeutic in a way?
Yeah, definitely.
So your vision for Burn It was to keep it completely genderless, so it could be adapted and told by absolutely anyone. Do you think that there is a need for more productions to be set this way? And what is the benefit to the audience for this?
Yeah, I absolutely do think we need more that is sort of running along these lines. But for me, it's actually more about the benefit to the artists and the industry rather than the audiences, because we still just have such a huge overrepresentation of men and male characters and straight male characters. I think I saw a statistic the other day that for every one female character in film, there's 3 males.
Wow.
And, for me, working in the dance industry, the theatre industry, I go to auditions and there might be 50 femme-presenting people going for one female role, but then 10 men going for 2 or 3 male roles. So it's just this constant thing where there's always so many femme-presenting people, so less numbers in the masc-presenting people, but still we're just creating all of this media just for men, and we're creating all the roles for men. And so then we're creating all the jobs and all the work for men. And so I would really love it to sort of shift. And obviously there are going to be some stories that need to be told from a certain gender perspective, but I think there are a lot that actually don't. And what if we could just cast the person who connects with it the best, the person who is the best for that role, rather than the man who connects with that the best? Because a lot of the time these stories are just human experiences, and they're a product of being a person living in the world, forming relationships, and not a product of anatomy or anything like that.
Yeah.
That's so true too. And I think there's a common misconception that when we're putting our feelings on a page, or we have fear of putting our feelings on a page or putting our feelings out to anywhere, that we're the only person that's felt like this. And so then when you write a story and other people connect to it, and you aren't gendering the feelings or gendering the role or the emotions, it opens it up for everyone to be like, oh, hey, I am this person in the story. Emotion has no gender anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Emotion has no gender.
But, in society, we've been taught that men are weak if they cry and emotions are for females or things like that. And I think it's time to really start peeling back the fact that everything is for everyone. And where did this come from in the first place? And it's only been media that's really pushed gender roles and social normativity down our throats for so long. And that's why so many people have consumed it.
Yeah.
Because they've been forced to.
Yeah. And I even found, particularly in Adelaide, because that was the first time we did the show with pretty much an entire audience of people that we didn't know.
Wow.
And I had a lot of men and mask people actually talk to me after the show, particularly about the content with the abusive partner, say that they really resonated with that situation. And even that specifically is something that we don't really talk about at all. We don't talk about men having abusive partners.
No.
And it was so nice to really feel that these were just universal experiences, and it was really lovely and powerful to be able to open up that space for people to come and talk about it, because there's such a thing about, as you said, men don't cry, men don't express emotions. There's such a thing of just, hiding and shutting any of that down. So to be able to start getting audiences talking about it felt really amazing.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, and that's why we all do what we do, is just to start those conversations.
I think as well, when you're talking about really heavy topics like domestic abuse or domestic violence, I think we fail to see sometimes that maybe we have experienced it and we haven't quite recognized it as that. And so when it's put in front of us in the form of...
told by someone else.
Yeah, or in the form of consuming media like a play or a TV show or something, we can start to reassess the experiences that we've had ourselves and gone, oh, maybe I have experienced narcissistic behavior. Maybe I have even portrayed a narcissist in different parts of my life. And that's where we can start to grow and change and learn ourselves as well. And I think there's a lot to be said about people that can bring those kinds of topics to the forefront in such a consumable way that a lot of people will choose to go and watch it, as opposed to hearing about something and saying, oh, it's not for me, I don't want to see that.
Yeah, and I think balancing the comedy is a really important part of that, because otherwise I think it would just be really hard to sit through, and it would just be so draining as an audience member, which is why I have, this constant rhythm throughout the play where if things get heavy, it's okay. We're going to lift you back up again. We're going to bring it into the light and not sit with those heavy feelings for too long.
Do you find in real life, when we're talking about heavy experiences, that even shining comedy through a real conversation can help somebody emote better?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think a lot of what works in this play is that it's very much based in my sense of humour and sort of my coping mechanisms. And so in my normal life, talking to people, I'm pretty open about things that have happened to me or my mental health struggles. And I often use comedy and lightness to make that easier, because even just talking to people about how you're feeling or something, sometimes even if that person isn't experiencing it, you telling them that something's really hard can be really confronting for someone. And so having just a bit of lightness or a little bit of humour, it's very Australian. It's the Australian way. It's the Australian way.
It is.
But I think it makes it easier to have genuine conversations, because it's not like, okay, we're going to knuckle down now and have this really serious emotional time. It's like we can just have a normal friend, light conversation, but be vulnerable with each other, which I think is really important.
And tackle some big issues.
I think it's okay to sit with feelings. I think that's the hardest thing, as we've spoken about, or as society's spoken about. A lot of the time it was like mental health was such a stigma around it, and everything was pushed to the side. So yeah, you're allowed to sit in those feelings, and then we'll go from there and we'll work out how to process from there.
I think we fail to see that everybody goes through the same thing, I think, at least once, or has been in a certain feeling before, and just being able to talk about it, it normalizes it. You're not isolated. People have been here before.
Yeah.
And the comedy helps.
Yeah, the comedy definitely helps.
Yeah, you're right about we just need to normalize it. And if we talk about it more, and if using the humour is the way that we enable ourselves to talk about it, it becomes less of a scary thing. Just like, okay, well, maybe this is the feeling that I have, but I know that a lot of people have felt this. I know that the people I'm talking to have felt this, and I don't have to let it absolutely bog me down for the next 2 months.
Yeah. Why did you call your play Burn It?
Oh,
I was thinking, like, is it the camping fire?
it's related to a lot of things, actually. And part of it might be a little bit of a spoiler.
Oh.
So I want to find a way to explain it
Without spoiling it.
I was like, oh, that does relate to camping. That's pretty cool.
Gotcha.
It's just one of those things when you do a title and you're like, you could read so many things into this and be like, I did that on purpose, but it wasn't. There is another scene that is fire related, sort of as a motif, but it's really kind of just about relationships and, you know, whether you decide to let it go up in flames or whether you decide to fight for it.
I love that.
And sort of recognizing, is there actually a right time to just let it go? Or should you always keep trying and keep fighting?
Wow.
Keep the fire burning.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've just done Adelaide Fringe and just finished Melbourne Fringe as well, and just seen like this production come to life. So how has that felt for you before gearing up for Brisbane?
It's actually been really overwhelming in a really great way, in a really positive way, because obviously when you create something, your first show of it will be, you know, with friends, and they're all going to tell you that you're great. But it's not until you actually get out into the public, and a festival is a really great way to do that because, you know, there are just people go into shows all the time. And it's not until you have people you don't know seeing the show that you can actually start to trust that, oh, maybe this is pretty good. Maybe this is pretty relatable content. So I think from Adelaide and Melbourne, and then also Sydney, we did Pride Fest in Sydney for Qtopia. I think just having the repeated interactions with the audiences after those festivals has been really powerful and affirming to me as a creative and just as a person that, you know, this work is pretty good and it does really connect with people. And I also, the other thing I love about festivals is just the community of artists. So, you know, particularly in Adelaide, I went to Adelaide for the entire month and I stayed there. Like, we only did a week of the show, but I was there for the month. So I was constantly going to other people's shows. I was going to the artist bar and talking to the artists every night. And it is just such a like beautiful, creative, inspiring community where you just want to talk to each other about what you're working on and your ideas and your art. And I think it's just, festivals are some of the best times ever for me because I think you really get to be part of your group.
And so that's where networking comes in for your next thing that you'll be doing. And so what's on the cards for you next? Obviously, you've got Melt here in Brisbane, which is the next ball to knock out of the park. So then what's next for you?
Well, I have applied to get some funding to do Adelaide Fringe again for 2025. And that is mainly to do the biggest season of this show yet.
Yeah.
Because when we did Adelaide at the start of this year, it was very much a test run. So we were in a free venue that was just like a little meeting room in a pub, and I brought my own lights and I set everything up. And we really did that with a $0 budget. So the next immediately approaching project is I've applied for funding. I'm currently waiting to find out if we get that funding, and I would love to do a big season in Adelaide. But then after that, I'm sort of on the fence because I think for this show, the only place really to take it next is if we had sort of like regional touring opportunities, because I think doing the festivals can only take you so far if you're self-funding. And we've got funding through the Queensland government for Melt, which we're so appreciative of. We've got funding through the Ballarat Arts Foundation for Melbourne. But for a lot of those opportunities, you can only do it once for the show. So you can't get the same funding for the same show again. So then I will be strapping in and I will be writing something new, I think. I'm really excited to work on something new. I actually have 2 whole plays sitting in my computer. One of them I think I'm just going to ignore. The other one I'm working on, I'm pretty excited about, but I think it's going to need quite a lot of development. So maybe I need a third one that's going to be another sort of great 2-hander fringe festival.
Yeah, the magic 3, the 3 musketeers.
Yeah.
But just quickly, what does it take to, so you've written a play and you've written this production of Burn It. How do you get it to the status of getting it into a festival? I know we touched on this before about trusting your friends to kind of make the production with you and get it off the ground, but how do you get it from there accepted into a festival?
Well, Adelaide Fringe and Melbourne Fringe and Melt, they're all open access festivals. So you can put literally anything in there. As long as you've got a show, the thing is you pay your registration fee and you put it in there. So that's not too tricky. The main thing that's tricky is if you want to be programmed into a space. So for Melbourne, we were in the festival hub, which is, you know, the main hub where all the shows are, and I had to apply and get programmed into that. And I actually think doing the Adelaide show at a $0 budget helped me get into the hub, because then I had a whole heap of reviews from the list and from radio stations, but then I also had audience reviews. And basically what these places want to see is that you've got a successful show that's worked. So if you can prove that you've already done it before, and it's had some degree of success, you're more likely to get programmed, as opposed to, this is my first show, it's never happened, but I promise you it's written and it's good.
Yeah.
But then also Adelaide allowed us to have a lot of opportunities, because Adelaide has a really great program called Honeypot. And basically delegates from all over the world come, and they might be people who program festivals, or they might be people who run venues, and they can come to your shows, or you can invite them to your shows, and then they can invite you to further opportunities. So that's actually what happened for Melt and for Sydney. So for Qtopia, they had a venue representative from Qtopia who saw the show and then approached me and said, I really want you to come and do the show in Sydney. And then the same thing happened for Melt. There was a Melt Festival representative. They came, they were like, we're doing this, we really want you to come. And then I was like, oh, I'm from Brisbane, this is great. And so then we ended up doing that, and they were actually really great with, you know, helping us find a venue and doing a lot of the logistics for that as well. So yeah, I think it's really just taking it small steps, because I think if we tried to go all out on the first one, we might not have had the base to be able to sort of slowly increase the scope every time.
Yeah, you have to have the groundwork to be able to reap the benefits. It's like reap what you sow. If you plant those seeds and you get them out there, and then you can start to see what it's going to give back to you.
Yeah, and I think definitely it will be easier for me from now on, because I have already done a show. And so a lot of festivals or things that you want to apply for, you can say like, here's an example of my previous work. And if they're looking at me and they're seeing like, oh, you've done 4 different states across Australia for a show, they at least know that you can produce something. Like they know that if you come in there, you're going to create something, it's going to happen, as opposed to, you know, some people might have grand plans but not actually be able to execute it. So I think definitely my plan is to just keep consistently creating things, and then hopefully that will allow me to just slowly start stepping up every time I do something.
Yeah. Because what is the grand plan for you as a writer and producer? What do you want to achieve?
Well, there are these 2 people that did Adelaide Fringe that I met and hung around with a bit. They're kind of more musicians, but they're also storytellers. They're called Wright and Granger, and they're from the UK. And basically what they do is they do 1 or 2 people shows. So it's either just one of them or the 2 of them. And they're kind of similar in content to what I like to write, because they're really emotional. They really connect with audiences. And I was really inspired by them and what they do, because they, you know, had this one show that they have been running for years and years and years, and it sells out and it's just incredible. And so they'll come and they'll do that show, but then they'll bring a new show. And so as everyone's coming to see their first show, people are also like, oh, Wright and Granger, I liked their one show, I'm going to go see that show. And then I've just seen they've just written a new show and they're touring that around, so now they've got all of that going on. And they're just the kind of people that if they put something out, people will see their name and they will come, because they'll be like, I like their work. That's what I would really love to be. I would love to be able to maybe have one show going, but then start writing new stuff, bringing new work to the table, and then having people go, oh, I liked your first one, I'll see your second one, and allow it to bubble up from there. I would just really love to be able to just create full time and not have to do anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the dream. Absolutely.
And I did actually have in Sydney one person say to me, I want to see everything you ever write. So that was a really nice
what
moment.
a compliment.
Getting close.
Yeah. Hey, one is better than none. One
Literally.
person can change your life.
Yeah.
I was going to say to you just then, like when you're talking about things that you create and talking about Burn It, how do you feel every time the show's about to begin?
Oh, just racked with nerves, really. I think if I wasn't also producing, like I will sometimes sit in front of the computer for like 8 hours doing producing work. That is really nerve-wracking, because it's not just being the actor then, which is what you would usually expect for, you know, your season's about to start. You just have to worry about your performance. But because I'm doing everything else, so I am like so worried about ticket sales and making sure we've got reviewers coming and have we got Green Room Award judges coming tonight and all of that, I am quite nervous. But then I think once we get into the actual show season and we start doing the shows and there's not really any work left that I can do in terms of publicity or whatever, and I can just be like, oh, I can just be the actor now, then it feels really great and it feels really exciting. And especially because I've done this show like Brisbane will be the 5th time that I've done a season of this show. It's really sitting in quite a nice place where I feel like I can just kind of play with the character and I can discover new things about them every time, and I can hear my scene partner say something in a different way every time. So that's a really lovely place to be sitting as a creator with the work.
Yeah, you can kind of see your work as 3-dimensional because you're in it and you see every aspect of it because you're enveloped by it, as opposed to thinking about all the administration side of things.
Literally.
So as we were talking about Burn It being a genderless production, you yourself present as non-binary. Can you tell us a bit about your own journey to self-discovery and what that looked and felt like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm still in the journey, really. I think it's something that I sort of learn more about every day, particularly because I am quite a femme-presenting person. I have long hair. I don't want to cut my hair. I don't want to shave my head. I don't think I'd look any good. I do wear makeup. I am quite, small and petite. And so people see me and they assume female. And so that has definitely made it harder for me to sort of grapple with that identity for myself and sort of feeling that my feelings were valid or invalid for that. But I think what I've really come to discover is that my feelings about gender and how I sit in that framework are very much to do with the fact that gender is such a social construct.
Oh, yeah.
I don't like using that phrase because it seems a little bit wanky, but it's like language and all of these things that humans have literally just made up.
Yep.
Like created it. It's just something that has evolved over time. And I think gender particularly has evolved from who was in power and, men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what we've arrived at today with our definitions of male and female and what we expect of those roles just doesn't really sit well with me on either side. And I think that's a big part of why I just don't really want to subscribe to that. I don't really want to be associated with either of those categories because I don't feel like they speak to who I am as a person. And I would really just like to be a person.
Yeah.
Being femme presenting as well and having that struggle because people will just assume that you are female. Why do we now think in society that someone who is non-binary has to fit a look of non-binary as well? I feel like that's now the new box to tick. It's like, oh, you're non-binary. Oh, you don't look non-binary. It's
what does non-binary look like? Yeah.
I think about this all the time, and I've had so many discussions with people about this because I actually think there have been times where I have said, I don't look like a non-binary person. And then I would have had a friend that was like, but you see the flaw in that, right? Like the whole point of non-binary is just that you're not in there. But we have sort of almost created a third gender that is non-binary, that is, an androgynous looking person when non-binary was not meant to be a third gender. It was meant to be not one of the two. So,
but then androgyny has been that one thing that society can accept as a non-binary person.
Absolutely, yeah. Because, if I shaved my head and stopped wearing makeup, then maybe people would use they, them pronouns a little bit more for me.
Yeah. Do you find yourself being forgiving because of being femme presenting, or do you find yourself being like, well, if they just asked me first, then they would know?
For me, it's really based on who it is. And I find, I do have to be a bit more forgiving when it is particularly older people who aren't working in the arts. Sometimes with that, I'm just like, I'm not even going to bother. Like, you're going to do your thing and you're probably not even thinking about that sort of stuff. When I am in a theatre setting or an arts setting and it's young people and they don't ask, it's not that I'm angry. I'm more just surprised because I very much in my own little artistic community where a lot of my friends are non-binary, all of my friends pretty much are queer. And so it's just a generally accepted thing that we know people's pronouns. And so then when you step outside that circle, you're like, oh, wait, actually, the rest of the world has got a long way to catch up. But yeah, I think it's really situational. Like, I am never going to be upset with someone for using different pronouns when it's a slip of the tongue. And I don't think anyone is ever going to be. The only time that I would be upset is if someone is doing it on purpose to hurt me, which I think is understandable. Fair. But even then, that's never happened to me. So
that's excellent.
Yeah. That kind of brings me to my next
Yeah, we started
next
talking about
question,
some problems.
Because, yeah, we were talking about the problems that people who identify as non-binary face. So I was going to say to you, what do you think some major problems in society that need attention to make it easier for non-binary people?
I think that's such a huge question.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. And I almost feel like inequipped to deal with it because I think, this is something that people study and, a sociology major might have a pretty good answer for. But I don't know, sometimes I do wonder if it's literally just comes down to that same fear of change and that fear of the other. And so we've had it all throughout history with racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia. And I think it's all to do with the fact that we as a society have set up these social norms and we have taught people their whole lives that that's the way that it's meant to be. And we're sort of now coming into a time where we're fighting against it a bit more, but we're still bringing people up with these norms. And so it's a very kind of 50-50 situation for every person, whether they're going to go, no, that goes against the way that things are going to be and maybe mistreat someone or, refuse to use pronouns or do something like that, or go, actually, I'm going to think about this and I guess it makes sense. So I think it's just such a strongly ingrained social thing.
I think we have, in social norms for generations and dating back thousands of years, kept people from being who they've truly been in so many ways, whether that be racism for one, as you said. We've gone through slavery, we've gone through interracial relationships not being allowed, we've gone through homophobia and the transphobia, and now the next thing is fear of something else. And I think people that are in general society that don't think about these things in terms of you're keeping someone from being their genuine self, I think they're just scared.
Yeah.
But scared of what? For someone else to live their truest self that doesn't affect them.
I feel like it's like every fear, like if you're scared of spiders, I think a lot of people would acknowledge that, all right, that little spider is actually not able to hurt me, but it doesn't stop your heart racing and all the responses. And I don't study sociology or anything, but it does definitely feel like a similar thing of just, not all fear and not all opinions are rational. And I think if we had better education and we had more exposure to different people and genders and sexualities, then maybe that fear wouldn't be so prominent because it wouldn't be something that's different and scary. It would just be something that has been the norm your whole life.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that kind of feeds into my next question. Do you think that having more queer stories that incorporate all genders and everybody that falls under the queer umbrella in mainstream media, do you think that's vital in relation to positive change in society?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think we really do underestimate the power of film and TV and theatre and what we see in the media, because it has so much effect, one, on queer people discovering who they are, but then also other non-queer people in terms of that exposure. The more that we see people who happen to be queer just doing normal things and living normal lives, the more we're going to see it as less of a difference or less of a thing. And it's just, okay, that person is queer. That affects nothing else. Like that is their romantic relationships and their sexual relationships, and that's literally it.
Yeah.
For queer people, having that representation in media is also really important because it's really affirming. And I think especially for people who might be, bisexual or pansexual, there's obviously a lot going on with, bi erasure. And I think a lot of people who, are attracted to multiple genders will have that sort of inner conflict of, oh, maybe I'm not actually queer, maybe I'm just, I'm not really, because I can't like both, or do I like one more? And I think having those feelings portrayed in the media is really important. Like when I was in high school, I was pretty resistant to feeling that I was queer. And I wasn't consuming a lot of queer media or anything like that. And then sort of in uni and after uni, I just started reading some like really trashy young adult queer books.
Nice.
And reading these like little queer characters talking about different feelings that they had, particularly with, being attracted to multiple genders, I started going, right, well, I have felt that exact way as well. So maybe these feelings I have about myself are actually valid, and maybe I am queer. And I think just, being able to have that relatability and that confirmation that what you feel does align with what other queer people feel is so important.
What characters come to mind for you as visibility that you saw in the media growing up or now that makes you feel seen?
Oh, I feel like I'm going to expose myself here. I definitely, kind of embarrassingly, remember reading the book Red, White and Royal Blue.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And that was kind of it, like the main point where I was like, okay, I definitely like multiple genders, I think. And then I can't even remember which character it was. It was I think only one of the characters in the book is bi, and the other one is just straight up gay.
Yeah.
And the bi character had a bit of a writing and dialogue about some feelings and some conflicts that they felt. And I just remember reading it and literally like texting one of my friends being like, how am I discovering this as a grown adult reading some, 16-year-old romance novel?
But it's wherever it is, right? Like wherever you find it.
Literally.
I think I've never personally considered myself to be pansexual, although I did date guys in high school, but I think everybody did. But nothing resonated with me more than David on Schitt's Creek when he's like, I like the wine, not the label.
The wine one. Oh,
yeah.
That's so good.
That's one of the quotes that stands out to me forever.
Yeah.
Like for sure.
That's a great one. Well, this has been an amazing interview and thank you so much. But before we let you go, obviously we said in the beginning of this interview, this is going to be a part of Melt Festival. So could you please give our listeners all the details about that?
Yeah, so we're doing 2 shows only in Brisbane. It'll be very exciting for me because I'm from Brisbane and this is the first time that I have performed one of my shows at home.
Yay, that's awesome.
Yeah. A little bit scary as well though because I, went to uni and studied in Melbourne. So, I've got quite a queer network there. But in Brisbane, I'm like, are there any queers? Like you guys said, there's just not a lot of media. There's not a lot of stuff that's, really overtly there. So I've been a bit nervous about it, but anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. We are doing the show at Big Fork Theatre in the Valley and from the 8th and 9th of November and it's at 9 p.m.
Well, if this interview has captivated anybody enough to want to go and see Burn It,
you should.
We will attach all of the links to the episode notes so you can easily buy tickets and find all the information. So Lydia, thank you so much for joining us and talking about your creative process and Burn It tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lydia.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
No worries.
Well, that was an amazing interview.
It was. Thank you, Lydia, so much for joining us.
Much. And until next time, you better remember to
stay gay, motherfuckers.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I'm talking about, you're talking about, we're talking about just gay stuff.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Just Gay Stuff. Make sure to follow us at Just Gay Stuff Podcast on all your socials and write to us with your stories at justgaystuffpodcast@gmail.com.